Tonight, Johnny Depp is not here, and that feels familiar, because Johnny Depp has been disappearing for a long time. Not all at once, slowly, in fragments. Johnny Depp never belonged to the center of the room, even when he was standing in it. He was always slightly to the side, watching, performing, hiding in plain sight. Most actors want to be seen. Johnny Depp wanted to become someone else, and that difference shaped everything. Now pause for a moment, before the scandals, before the headlines, before the noise. Johnny Depp was known for disappearing into roles, not elevating himself, erasing himself. That kind of acting isn't loud, it's evasive, it avoids the self, and avoidance when repeated becomes a habit. Now think about masks. Johnny Depp didn't just wear costumes, he lived inside them. Jack Sparrow, Edward Scissorhands, Hunter S. Thompson, each character louder than the last, each one more exaggerated. But exaggeration can be camouflage. When the character is big enough, no one looks for the person underneath. Johnny Depp understood that early. He made himself unreadable by becoming unforgettable. Now let's talk about charm. Charm is a powerful distraction. It softens edges. It deflects questions. Johnny Depp's charm wasn't polished. It was messy, unpredictable. That messiness felt authentic. But authenticity doesn't always mean clarity. Sometimes it just means no one knows where to look. Now think about success. Success usually narrows people. It rewards repetition. Do what works, do it again. Johnny Depp resisted that. He chose odd roles, uncomfortable characters. He rejected the straight line. That rebellion made him interesting. But rebellion sustained too long becomes instability. Now consider fame. Fame amplifies everything. Strength becomes myth. Weakness becomes spectacle. Johnny Depp entered fame without ever wanting control over it. He let it wash over him. And waves don't ask for permission. They erode. Slowly. Now let's talk about identity again. Johnny Depp rarely spoke as himself. He spoke through characters. Interviews felt performative, answers vague, stories circular. That wasn't confusion, it was avoidance. Avoidance protects until it doesn't, because when crisis arrives, there's no solid self to return to. Now here's the late-night irony. People said Johnny Depp was eccentric, but eccentricity can be armor. If people think you're strange, they stop asking you to be consistent. Consistency demands accountability. Johnny Depp lived outside consistency. That gave him freedom. But it also removed structure, and structure is what holds people together when things fall apart. Now think about collapse. Collapse rarely begins with a single event. It's cumulative. Years of deflection, years of indulgence, years of letting characters speak instead of the person. Eventually the line blurs. Where does performance end and where does responsibility begin? Johnny Depp lived in that blur. And blur is dangerous when reality demands clarity. Now let's talk about narrative. Narratives form quickly. They don't wait for nuance. Johnny Depp's story was no longer his to tell. It became public property, interpreted, debated, judged, and someone who spent a lifetime hiding is unprepared to suddenly be examined. Now think about control again. Control requires grounding. Johnny Depp floated. Between personas, between lifestyles, between realities. Floating feels artistic, but it also means you don't anchor anywhere. And when storms come, anchors matter. Now consider masculinity. Johnny Depp represented a romantic masculinity, sensitive, broken, rebellious. That image was attractive, but it also excused fragility. Fragility left unexamined turns into dysfunction, and dysfunction doesn't disappear just because it's charming. Now here's another irony. Johnny Depp was admired for being different, but difference without direction eventually isolates. People stop knowing how to reach you, and isolation feeds misunderstanding. Now let's talk about silence. Johnny Depp went quiet long before the public noticed. Not physically absent, emotionally distant. He retreated further into roles, further into personas, until the distance became permanent. Now think about consequence. Consequence arrives when performance stops working, when charm can't redirect, when masks fall off under pressure. Johnny Depp faced that moment without rehearsal, because real life doesn't allow retakes. Now pause here. Was Johnny Depp misunderstood, or was he unreachable? Because those two look similar from the outside, and the answer matters. Now bring this back to you, because this isn't just about Johnny Depp. It's about what happens when identity becomes a role, when escaping the self feels safer than inhabiting it. Johnny Depp built a career on transformation. But transformation without grounding eventually costs something. So tonight, this isn't about judging Johnny Depp. It's about recognizing the risk of living behind masks for too long. Because masks protect, but they also separate, and separation over time can feel like disappearance. Johnny Depp didn't vanish suddenly. He faded, piece by piece, behind characters that were louder than the person wearing them. Now let's talk about reckoning. Because reckoning doesn't arrive with drama. It arrives with stillness. When the noise fades and there's no character left to hide behind. Johnny Depp reached that moment later than most people. Not because he avoided reality, but because reality had always felt optional to him. When you live inside imagination long enough, real life starts to feel negotiable. Rules feel flexible. Consequences feel distant, until they aren't. Now think about collapse again. Collapse is rarely explosive. It's quiet. It's waking up one day and realizing the roles don't protect you anymore. That the charm doesn't redirect attention, that the mask no longer fits the moment. Johnny Depp built a life where performance solved problems. But real conflict doesn't respond to performance. It demands presence. And presence is something Johnny Depp practiced less than transformation. Now consider responsibility. Responsibility requires a stable center, a place where decisions land. Johnny Depp lived on the edges. Edges are creative, but they're also unstable. When things went wrong, there was no center to absorb impact. Everything spilled outward. Now think about public judgment. Public judgment is brutal because it has no patience for nuance. Johnny Depp's life became a spectacle of interpretation. People chose sides. Narratives hardened. But the deeper issue was never fully addressed. What happens to someone who never learned to exist without a role? Now let's talk about exhaustion. Exhaustion doesn't always look tired. Sometimes it looks careless. Johnny Depp's later years carried that carelessness, not malicious, detached. When you're exhausted, you stop managing outcomes. You let things happen to you. That surrender feels artistic, but it's also dangerous. Now consider isolation again. Isolation isn't being alone, it's being unreachable. Johnny Depp became unreachable even to himself. The distance between action and reflection grew wider, and in that space, mistakes multiply. Not because of intent, but because of absence. Now think about narrative recovery. Recovery isn't about reclaiming image, it's about reclaiming agency. Johnny Depp's story stopped being his for a long time. It was told by lawyers, by headlines, by strangers online. That kind of loss of authorship is destabilizing, especially for someone who built their life on storytelling. Now let's talk about masculinity again. Johnny Depp's masculinity was romanticized, the tortured artist, the sensitive rebel. But romantic masculinity often avoids accountability. It frames damage as depth, and depth without repair turns into repetition. Johnny Depp repeated patterns because patterns felt familiar. Familiarity feels safe even when it's destructive. Now think about stillness. Stillness is terrifying for someone who survives through motion. Johnny Depp avoided stillness for decades. When he finally faced it, it was not gentle. Stillness forced questions. Who am I without the character, without the myth, without the escape? Those questions don't have quick answers. Now here's the late-night irony. People talk about Johnny Depp as if his story is finished. It isn't, but it is quieter now. And quiet is where real rebuilding happens. Not on stage, not in costume, but in limitation. Now consider rebuilding. Rebuilding doesn't look heroic. It looks small. It looks like restraint, like fewer words, like less explanation. Johnny Depp's later presence feels muted, but muted doesn't mean empty. It means cautious. Caution is not weakness, it's learning. Now think about accountability again. Accountability doesn't erase talent, it contextualizes it. Johnny Depp's talent was never in question, but talent without grounding doesn't sustain life. It only sustains moments. Now let's talk about time. Time strips away mythology. What remains is behavior, patterns, choices. Johnny Depp's legacy will always be complex, not clean, not easily summarized, but complexity is honest, and honesty is the only place rebuilding can begin. Now bring this back to you, because this isn't just about Johnny Depp, it's about the danger of escaping the self instead of understanding it. Transformation is powerful, but integration is essential. Johnny Depp transformed endlessly. Integration came late, but late is not never. Now here's the final late-night thought. Masks protect us when the world feels hostile, but if we never remove them, we forget who they were protecting. Johnny Depp lived behind masks longer than most people could survive. Those masks made him iconic. They also made him fragile. True recovery doesn't come from choosing a better mask. It comes from choosing no mask at all and learning to stay, even when staying is uncomfortable, even when there's nothing to perform. Johnny Depp's story is not a cautionary tale. It's a human one, about creativity without grounding, about charm without limits, about what happens when escape becomes a lifestyle, and about the quiet, difficult work of returning to yourself after a lifetime of becoming someone else.